Welcome. Sit back, relax, or listen to my voice while you do something else. Today, you will listen to a story about success, one that will teach you many things. Let your mind unwind and allow yourself to drift into the story. Enjoy. No one tells you this at the beginning. They don't tell you because if they did, most people would never start. Success is sold as freedom, as happiness. It's proof that you were right all along. Well, the first lie about success is this, that it begins with clarity. It doesn't. Success begins with confusion, with insecurity, with a quiet dissatisfaction you can't fully explain. Most people who chase success aren't driven by passion. They're driven by discomfort, a sense that something is wrong, that life feels smaller than it should, too predictable, too controlled, too safe. You don't wake up inspired. You wake up restless, tired of being replaceable, tired of watching time pass while your potential stays theoretical, tired of telling yourself, one day, things will change. This is the part no one posts online because it doesn't look good. The beginning of success feels like inadequacy, like envy you're ashamed to admit, like resentment toward people who seem to be moving forward while you're standing still. And here's the uncomfortable truth. That feeling doesn't disappear once you start chasing success. It intensifies. At first, you believe success will fix it. You think clarity will come after you begin, that confidence will follow action, that certainty will grow with results. But the early phase of success strips you of illusion. You start without knowing if you're capable, without knowing if the sacrifice will be worth it, without knowing if you'll fail publicly or quietly disappear. You don't feel brave. You feel exposed. Every step forward makes you more aware of what you don't know. Every attempt highlights how far you are from where you want to be. This is where most people quit. Not because it's hard, but because it's unclear. Because there is no confirmation, no applause, no sign that you're on the right path. Just silence, just effort, doubt. And this is the lie that ends most journeys before they begin. The belief that success should feel right early on, that it should feel aligned, that it should feel rewarding. In reality, success feels awkward. It feels lonely. It feels like walking away from a version of your life that everyone else expects you to keep living. When you choose to pursue something bigger, you don't immediately gain a new identity. You lose the old one first. You are no longer fully who you were, but you are not yet who you want to become. You exist in between, and that space is deeply uncomfortable. People will ask what you're doing. You won't have a clean answer. They'll ask how it's going. You won't know what to say. You'll feel pressured to justify a decision that hasn't paid off yet. Slowly, doubt creeps in, not just from others, but from yourself. You start wondering if you misread the signs, if you overestimated yourself, if this discomfort is a warning instead of a rite of passage. No one tells you that the early stage of success is mostly about losing certainty, losing routines, losing approval, losing the comforting illusion that you know where your life is going. Before success gives you options, it takes away stability. Before it gives you confidence, it forces you to act without it. This is why motivation fails so quickly. Motivation expects emotional reward. Success demands tolerance for emotional emptiness. You keep going not because you feel good, but because stopping feels worse. Because returning to the old life would require admitting that this discomfort defeated you. And slowly, almost invisibly, something changes. Not your results, not your circumstances, your tolerance. You begin to realize that confusion is not a signal to stop. It's the environment in which growth happens. That uncertainty is not a flaw in the process. It's the process. The people who make it aren't the most talented or the most confident. They're the ones who don't interpret early discomfort as failure. They don't need clarity to move. They move despite its absence. They understand that the lie isn't that success is hard. The lie is that it's supposed to feel good at the start. The moment you decide you want more from life, something breaks. Not externally, not visibly, but internally. A quiet fracture forms between who you are and who you're expected to be. You can still go to work, still show up, still smile at the right moments, but you're no longer fully there. Your body follows the routine. Your mind starts drifting elsewhere. This is the hidden cost of ambition. Once you see that another life is possible, you can't unsee it. And from that moment on, your old life starts to feel heavier. Conversations feel repetitive. Goals that once seemed reasonable begin to feel suffocating. You're not unhappy, but you're no longer content. And that limbo is exhausting. No one prepares you for how isolating this phase is, okay? You haven't achieved anything yet, so you can't point to results, okay? But you've already outgrown the mindset of the people around you. You don't fit in your old world anymore, but you don't belong to the new one either. You exist in a space where doubt thrives. Too ambitious for some, not successful enough for others. This is where the mental tax begins. You start questioning your own thoughts. Am I being ungrateful? Am I delusional? Am I chasing something unrealistic? Okay, the people around you, often without bad intentions, reinforce these doubts. Okay, being practical, being realistic, being responsible. But what they're really doing is protecting their own sense of order. Your ambition threatens the comfort of predictability. So you learn to stay quiet. You stop sharing your goals, okay? You stop explaining yourself. Not because you don't believe in your vision, but because constantly defending it drains you. Every raised eyebrow, every sarcastic comment, every subtle reminder of how things usually go chips away at your energy. Energy is the one thing you can't afford to waste at this stage. The desire for more comes with an unspoken guilt. You feel it when your life is objectively fine, yet you still want something different. You feel it when others would gladly trade places with you. This guilt makes you hesitate, slows your actions, convinces you that wanting more is a form of disrespect toward what you already have. But here's the brutal truth. Suppressing ambition doesn't create gratitude. It creates resentment. You don't become more thankful by staying small. You become bitter. You start blaming your circumstances, your job, your relationships, even yourself. The frustration has to go somewhere. If it doesn't fuel growth, it turns inward and poisons your self-respect. At this point, many people negotiate with themselves. They promise they'll try a little. They'll take minimal risks. They'll pursue success in a way that doesn't disturb their current life too much. This compromise feels mature, responsible, balanced, but it's usually a lie. Big change demands disproportionate effort. Wanting extraordinary outcomes while maintaining ordinary habits creates a constant sense of failure. Progress, in the beginning, is deeply unbalanced. You give more than you get. You invest time, focus, and emotional energy with no guarantee of return. Your schedule becomes tighter, your patience shorter, your margin for comfort almost non-existent. And yet, externally, nothing has changed. This mismatch between effort and reward is where motivation collapses. This is why wanting more is dangerous. It's not because ambition is wrong, but because it forces you to confront the gap between desire and reality. That gap is uncomfortable. It exposes your limitations. It reveals how much work you've been avoiding. And it doesn't close quickly. It stays open long enough to test your identity. You start realizing that success isn't just about achieving something. It's about enduring the person you become while pursuing it. Less available, less relatable, less aligned with the expectations that once defined you. Wanting more means accepting that some doors will quietly close behind you. Not because you slammed them shut, but because you walked too far to keep them open. And this is the decision most people never consciously make. They don't choose to quit. They choose to return to familiarity, to the life that demands less explanation, less tension, less internal conflict. They convince themselves they've matured, when in reality, they've retreated. Wanting more costs you peace before it gives you purpose. Okay? It takes away belonging before it offers freedom. Hey, unless you're willing to pay that price without immediate validation, ambition will always feel like a mistake. There is a point early in the pursuit of success where reality becomes impossible to ignore. The excitement fades. The initial surge of motivation dries up. What remains is repetition, effort without feedback, movement without visible progress. This is the stage where ambition stops feeling inspiring and starts feeling heavy. Most people believe they quit because it gets hard. That's not accurate. They quit because the story they told themselves no longer matches their experience. They imagined growth, momentum, signs that they were on the right path. Instead, they encounter silence, no messages, no recognition, no external confirmation that their sacrifice makes sense. Human beings are wired for feedback. We rely on response to orient ourselves. When effort produces nothing measurable, doubt fills the gap. Every day begins to feel like a test with no results sheet. You start questioning not just your strategy, but your judgment. Am I wasting my time? Am I falling behind? Did I misunderstand what success actually requires? This is where comparison becomes lethal. If you look around and see others progressing in conventional ways, promotions, stable routines, clear milestones, meanwhile, your path feels undefined, risky, delayed. You're not failing publicly, but you're not winning either. You exist in a gray zone where progress is internal and invisible. At this stage, quitting feels logical, rational, even responsible. You can still return to the version of life that makes sense to everyone else. You can reclaim predictability. You can stop explaining yourself. Yeah, the most dangerous part is that quitting doesn't feel like defeat. Okay? It feels like relief. This is why so few people cross this threshold. It's not because they lack ability, but because they misinterpret discomfort. They see uncertainty as a sign of misalignment rather than a sign of transition. They assume that if something is meant for them, it should feel smoother, more natural, less resistant. But success is not a linear upgrade. It's an identity shift. And identity shifts are violent. To require the old version of you to weaken before the new one can exist. That process is destabilizing by design. You lose confidence before you gain competence. You lose structure before you build your own. You lose certainty before you earn conviction. Those who move forward do something subtle but crucial. They stop demanding emotional reassurance from the process. They stop asking whether it feels right and start asking whether they're willing to tolerate the discomfort long enough for reality to change. They accept that progress will lag far behind effort, that results will arrive late, that validation may never come when they expect it. This is the moment where success becomes selective. It filters people not by talent, but by patience, not by intelligence, but by emotional resilience. The ones who stay are not immune to doubt. They simply don't obey it. They let uncertainty exist without allowing it to dictate their actions. Most people are unwilling to live without clarity. They need permission to continue. They need proof. They need reassurance. Okay? And when the process offers none of that, they interpret it as rejection. But the truth is harsher and simpler. The process is indifferent. It doesn't reward hope. It doesn't punish fear. It only responds to consistency. This stage doesn't last forever, but it lasts long enough to break most people. And once you pass it, something irreversible happens. You no longer romanticize success. You understand its cost. You stop chasing it for validation and start respecting it as a responsibility. You realize that success is not something you arrive at. It's something you endure long before it shows up in your life. At this point, turning back is no longer an option. Not because success is guaranteed, but because you've changed. You've learned to function without certainty, to move without applause, to work without immediate reward. Okay? And that capacity, more than any strategy or opportunity, is what separates those who make it from those who almost did. The more serious you become about success, the quieter your life gets. Not immediately, And not dramatically, but gradually. Conversations shorten. Invitations slow down. Messages go unanswered longer than before. At first, you don't notice it. You assume you're just busy, focused, temporarily unavailable. But over time, a pattern emerges. It's a path you've chosen, doesn't just demand effort, creates distance. Success isolates you long before it rewards you. This is not because people are against you. It's because most relationships are built on shared routines, shared complaints, shared limitations. When you step outside of those patterns, even slightly, friction appears. You start living by a different rhythm. Your priorities shift. Your tolerance for distraction decreases. And without saying a word, you become less compatible with the life you used to share. At first, the isolation feels self-imposed. You cancel plans because you're tired. Skip gatherings because you have work to do. You tell yourself it's temporary, that once things work out, you'll rebalance everything. But what you don't realize is that isolation is not just a scheduling issue. It's a psychological one. You're no longer fully present in conversations that don't align with where you're going. You listen, but you're not engaged. You laugh, but your mind is elsewhere. You feel guilty for feeling bored. And that guilt makes you withdraw even more. Slowly, without a clear moment of rupture, distance becomes the default. People notice the change before you do. They sense your absence, even when you're physically there. They interpret it in different ways. Some assume you think you're better than them. Others assume you've changed for the worse. A few will be curious, but most will quietly detach. Not out of malice, but out of confusion. Your trajectory no longer matches theirs. This is one of the most uncomfortable truths about success. It breaks symmetry. Growth is uneven. When one person accelerates, the gap widens, and gaps are awkward. They make people uncomfortable. They create unspoken tension. You don't argue. You don't fight. You simply stop understanding each other the way you used to. The isolation deepens when you realize you can't fully explain what you're doing. It's not because it's secret, but because it's unfinished. Your vision is fragile. Saying it out loud exposes it to doubt, skepticism, and premature judgment. So you keep it to yourself. And in doing so, you remove one of the main bridges between you and others, shared meaning. Loneliness enters quietly here. Not the dramatic kind, but the subtle kind. It's a kind where you're surrounded by people, yet feel unseen. It's a kind where you crave connection, but don't have the energy to maintain it. You begin to understand that isolation is not the absence of people, it's the absence of resonance. This is where many people retreat. They mistake isolation for a warning sign. They conclude that something must be wrong if the path feels this lonely. They return to familiar environments, not because those environments are healthy, but because they're comforting. Familiarity reduces friction. It reassures you that you belong somewhere. But success doesn't offer belonging early on. It offers separation. It removes you from the crowd before it gives you a place to stand. This is not a flaw in the process. It's a filter. The solitude forces you to confront yourself without distraction, without constant feedback, without emotional buffering. Those who continue learn to tolerate being misunderstood. They accept that alignment with their future requires misalignment with their present. They stop trying to be fully accessible. They stop explaining every decision. They let silence replace justification. This isolation reshapes you. It sharpens your thinking. It hardens your discipline. It also exposes your weaknesses. Without social noise, your doubts grow louder. Your fears have more room to breathe. You can no longer hide behind busyness or validation. You either build internal stability or you collapse under the weight of your own thoughts. Success demands this phase, not because it wants you alone, but because it needs you independent. Before you can lead, create, or sustain anything meaningful, you have to learn how to function without constant connection, without approval, without reassurance. The irony is that many people say they want success, but they're not willing to lose proximity. They want progress without distance, growth without separation. But the path doesn't work that way. Success isolates you first, so that when connection returns later, it's chosen, not required. If you can't survive this stage, you won't reach the next one. Because success doesn't just change what you have, it changes who you can stay close to. There comes a moment when the isolation stops being abstract and becomes personal. It's no longer just fewer messages or missed gatherings. It's the realization that certain people no longer understand you and may not want to. The jokes don't land the same way. The conversations feel shallow. The silence between words grows heavier. You haven't changed your values. You haven't betrayed anyone. But your direction has shifted, and direction matters more than intention. People connect over shared trajectories, not just shared history. When those trajectories diverge, closeness erodes, even if affection remains. This is where guilt enters the process. You start questioning whether your ambition is selfish, whether choosing your future means abandoning your past. You replay old memories, old versions of yourself, and wonder if you're becoming someone unrecognizable. The temptation is to slow down, not because you've lost belief, but because you want to preserve familiarity. But familiarity is deceptive. It feels like loyalty, but it often disguises fear. Fear of outgrowing relationships. Fear of being seen as different. It's fear of standing alone in your decisions. So you compromise. You dilute your focus. You stay available when you should be building. And slowly, resentment replaces guilt. You begin to notice it in subtle ways. You feel irritated after conversations that used to energize you. You leave interactions feeling drained instead of supported. You censor yourself to avoid sounding obsessed or intense. You shrink your vision to fit the room. And every time you do, something inside you tightens. Not everyone will react the same way. Some people will try to pull you back with concern, disguised as advice. Don't overdo it. Be careful. You're thinking too big. Others will use humor to undermine your seriousness. A few will distance themselves quietly, deciding it's easier to disengage than to adapt. What hurts most is that these reactions don't come from enemies. They come from people who care. And that's what makes this stage so confusing. You're not fighting opposition, you're navigating misalignment. And misalignment doesn't announce itself loudly, just creates friction that never fully resolves. At this point, many people attempt to carry both worlds. They try to maintain the same level of closeness while pursuing a completely different future. This balancing act rarely works. Progress demands time, energy, and emotional bandwidth. Relationships demand presence, attention, and availability. When both are stretched thin, something gives. You begin to realize that distance is not always a failure of character. Sometimes it's a consequence of growth. People evolve at different speeds. When one person accelerates, the gap feels uncomfortable for everyone involved. And not everyone is willing to adjust their pace. The hardest part is accepting that explanations don't fix this. You can articulate your goals perfectly and still be misunderstood. You can reassure people of your intentions and still feel alone. Alignment is not created through communication alone. It's created through shared direction. Without that, words fall flat. This is where emotional maturity is tested. You must decide whether to prioritize comfort or consistency, whether to preserve relationships at any cost or allow space to form without resentment. Letting distance happen without turning it into bitterness is one of the quiet disciplines success demands. Those who make it through this phase learn to stop forcing proximity. They stop chasing validation from people who no longer resonate. They release the need to be fully understood by everyone. Instead of fighting the distance, they respect it. They allow relationships to shift naturally, without blame. This doesn't mean cutting people off ruthlessly. It means accepting that not every connection is meant to survive every version of you. Some relationships are seasonal. They serve a purpose, offer support, then fade as circumstances change. Holding on to them past their natural lifespan only creates tension. Isolation, in this sense, becomes clarifying. It reveals which connections are rooted in mutual growth and which were sustained by convenience. It teaches you to value depth over familiarity, and it forces you to build strength internally rather than relying on external affirmation. By the time you reach the next stage, you understand something most people never do. Success doesn't require you to abandon everyone, but it does require you to stop carrying everyone with you. There is a version of isolation that weakens people, and there is another that sharpens them. The difference is not circumstance, but response. When you are cut off from constant interaction, distraction, and validation, your inner world grows louder. For many, that noise becomes unbearable. For a few, it becomes a weapon. This is the point where solitude stops feeling like a loss and starts functioning like a training ground. You begin to notice how much of your identity used to be shaped by reaction, by feedback, by approval, by resistance. Without those mirrors, you're forced to confront who you are without an audience. Your thoughts become more precise. Your standards rise. Your tolerance for wasted time disappears. Alone, you see patterns you used to ignore. The habits that keep you stagnant. The excuses you repeat. The fears you dress up as logic. There is no one to impress, no one to blame. Progress becomes honest, brutally so. Every action is either moving you forward or exposing your avoidance. This level of self-awareness is uncomfortable. You realize how much energy you once spent managing perception instead of building capability. How often you delayed action to avoid judgment. How many decisions were guided by acceptance rather than alignment. Isolation strips away those incentives. What remains is intention. At this stage, discipline deepens. Not the loud, motivational kind, but the quiet, uncompromising kind. You do the work even when no one will know. You improve skills that won't be recognized for months, sometimes years. You stop performing productivity and start embodying it. Your days become simpler, fewer words, fewer explanations, more output. This is where you become dangerous not to others, but to your former limitations. You are no longer dependent on mood. You are no longer easily distracted by social noise. You've trained yourself to operate without emotional reinforcement, and that makes you resilient in a way most people never develop. But this strength comes with a cost. You become harder to relate to. Small talk feels empty. Drama feels pointless. You're not above it, you're just no longer interested in it. This can make you seem cold or detached. In reality, you've simply recalibrated what deserves your attention. The risk here is imbalance. Some people confuse solitude with superiority. They retreat so deeply that they lose empathy. They mistake detachment for enlightenment. This is not strength, it's avoidance in a more sophisticated form. True growth doesn't reject connection. It chooses it deliberately. Those who navigate this stage well learn to reintroduce people into their lives selectively, not out of need, but out of alignment. They value relationships that respect, focus, boundaries, and long-term vision. They no longer seek to be understood by everyone, only by those who are walking in a similar direction. Isolation, when used correctly, doesn't make you antisocial. It makes you intentional. You learn the difference between connection that nourishes and connection that distracts. You stop filling silence just to avoid discomfort. You allow space for thought, for strategy, for long-term planning. By the time success begins to show externally, you are already changed internally. The isolation has done its work. You are no longer fragile. You no longer need constant reassurance. You can stand alone without feeling incomplete. This is why success often looks sudden from the outside. People don't see the years of quiet preparation, the long stretches of solitude, the internal battles fought without witnesses. They only see the result and assume luck or timing. But the truth is simpler. You became comfortable being alone long enough to build something real. And that comfort gave you an edge most people never earn. Most people grow up believing a simple equation. Work hard, stay consistent, and success will follow. It's a comforting idea. Fair, predictable. It suggests that effort is always rewarded, that persistence alone is a guarantee. But this belief is one of the most damaging myths in modern culture. Hard work is common. Success is not. Millions of people work hard every day and never escape their circumstances. They wake up early, they stay late, they sacrifice weekends, okay? And still, nothing changes in any meaningful way. The difference is not effort, okay? It's direction, leverage, and timing factors no one teaches you early on. Hard work without strategy is just exhaustion with better branding. In the beginning, effort feels productive because it gives you a sense of control. You can't control outcomes, but you can control how much you work, so you work more. You tell yourself that volume will compensate for lack of clarity, that if you just grind long enough, the path will reveal itself. Sometimes it does. Most of the time, it doesn't. This is where frustration begins to build. You're doing everything right. You're disciplined. You're consistent. You're showing up. But progress is slow or non-existent. The system you're operating in doesn't reward effort evenly. It rewards outcomes, visibility, and scale. And those don't automatically come from working harder. No one tells you this early because it sounds cynical. But effort is only valuable when applied to the right constraints. 10 hours of focused work on a high-leverage skill can outweigh years of unfocused labor. Cues. Matter takes experimentation. Failure. It's exposure things most people avoid because they feel inefficient. So instead, people double down on what they already know. The perfect routines that don't move the needle, okay? They become very good at tasks that don't compound. And because they're busy, they mistake motion for progress. Hard work becomes a shield. A way to avoid uncomfortable questions. Am I working on the right thing? Am I positioned correctly? Is this effort scalable? Or am I just renting stability? These questions are harder than waking up early. They force you to confront the possibility that you've been investing energy into a system that will never pay you back proportionally. And that realization is painful. It threatens your identity as a disciplined, responsible person. This is why many people defend hard work so aggressively. Not because it works, but because questioning it destabilizes their sense of meaning. If effort alone isn't enough, then success isn't guaranteed. And if success isn't guaranteed, then sacrifice feels risky. But success has always been asymmetric. A small percentage of actions produce a disproportionate share of results. Most effort is invisible to the outcome. This doesn't make the system unfair, it makes it selective. Those who succeed don't necessarily work harder than everyone else. They work longer on uncertainty. They spend more time experimenting without payoff. They tolerate inefficiency early so they can create efficiency later. They accept that most of what they do won't matter until something does. Hard work is the entry fee, not the differentiator. It gets you into the game. It does not decide the winner. The winners are the ones who learn how to direct their effort, how to identify leverage, and how to abandon paths that reward effort but not progress. This is uncomfortable because it removes moral comfort from success. You can't simply say, I worked harder. You have to admit you worked differently, okay? And working differently often looks lazy, risky, or unfocused from the outside until it works. Understanding this doesn't make success easier, it makes it clearer. You stop chasing exhaustion as proof of worth. You stop confusing suffering with progress. Hey, and you begin asking a more dangerous question than, am I working hard enough? Hey, you ask, is this work actually capable of changing my life? When you start asking that, comfort disappears. But clarity finally has a chance to enter. One of the most invisible traps on the path to success is usefulness. Being reliable, being competent, being the person others depend on. At first, it feels like progress. People trust you, they give you more responsibility, okay? They praise your work ethic, but slowly, usefulness becomes a ceiling. The world rewards value, not effort. And value is not the same as usefulness. Useful people solve problems that already exist. Valuable people create outcomes that didn't exist before. The first keeps systems running. The second changes them. Most hard workers get stuck in the first category without realizing it. They become indispensable in roles that limit their growth. This is why so many disciplined, intelligent people plateau. They are too good at executing instructions, too efficient at maintaining processes, too reliable to replace. And paradoxically, that reliability makes them invisible when it comes to advancement. No one tells you that being good at your job can trap you in it. When you consistently deliver, expectations rise, but rewards don't scale proportionally. You're given more tasks, more pressure, more responsibility, but rarely more leverage. You become busy, not powerful. And because you're producing, it's hard to justify stepping back to rethink your position. Stopping feels irresponsible. Slowing down feels like regression, so you stay useful. This trap is reinforced by praise. Compliments feel like progress. Recognition feels like momentum. But praise often comes without upside, satisfies the ego while keeping you in place. You're acknowledged for your contribution, not compensated for your impact. Valuable work looks different. It's often ambiguous. It doesn't always produce immediate results. And because of that, it's easier to avoid. Being useful gives you certainty. Being valuable demands vision. To move beyond usefulness, you have to stop asking, "How can I help?" and start asking what actually moves the outcome. That shift is uncomfortable because it forces you to prioritize leverage over loyalty. You may have to say no to tasks that make you look good but keep you small. You may have to disappoint people who benefit from your reliability. This is where many people hesitate. Value with morality. They believe that working harder, helping more, sacrificing more makes them deserving. But success doesn't operate on moral logic. It operates on results. Outcomes matter more than intentions. Creating value often looks selfish at first. You step away from maintenance work. You focus on fewer things. You invest time into skills that don't have immediate payoff. From the outside, it can appear as if you're doing less. In reality, you're repositioning. This repositioning carries risk. You lose short-term validation. You may lose income stability. You may lose your identity as the dependable one. But what you gain is optionality. You gain the ability to influence outcomes rather than just support them. Those who break through understand this distinction early. They stop measuring their worth by how busy they are. They stop equating exhaustion with importance. They build assets instead of schedules, systems instead of routines, skills that compound instead of tasks that reset every day. Hard work becomes strategic at this point. It's no longer about volume. It's about placement. Where you apply effort matters more than how much you apply. 1 hour spent on a high leverage decision can outweigh weeks of flawless execution on low impact work. This realization is unsettling because it invalidates years of conditioning. You were taught to be useful, to be reliable, to be needed. But success often requires being unnecessary in the short term so you can become irreplaceable in the long term. Letting go of usefulness feels like letting go of safety, but safety is often the enemy of scale. If your effort doesn't detach from your time, your upside remains capped. Value is created when effort continues to produce results long after it's applied. This is why some people seem to progress effortlessly while others grind endlessly. It's not luck, it's leverage. One group is paid for activity, the other is paid for outcome. Until you make that shift, hard work will keep you busy, but never free. There comes a point where working harder no longer produces better results. Not because you've become lazy, but because you've reached the limits of effort-based progress. Your time is finite. Your energy is capped. And no matter how disciplined you are, there are only so many hours you can trade before the returns flatten. This is the moment where many people feel betrayed by the system. They did what they were told. They sacrificed. They stayed consistent. And yet, progress slows. Income plateaus. Growth stalls. The strategy that once worked no longer scales. This isn't failure. It's a transition point most people never recognize. Effort has diminishing returns. In the early stages, effort creates momentum. You learn faster, you improve visibly, you feel productive. But eventually, each additional hour produces less impact. You're maintaining, not expanding. You're sustaining output, not multiplying it. Okay? Unless you change the structure of your work, you're locked into a ceiling. Okay? This is where systems replace hustle. Systems allow your effort to outlive you. They create output without requiring constant input. They introduce leverage into your work. Without systems, success remains fragile. It depends on your presence, your energy, your availability. Miss a day, and progress halts. A burnout, and everything collapses. Building systems requires a different mindset than grinding. It forces you to think in terms of process, delegation, automation, and scale. And that thinking feels slow at first. You invest time into things that don't immediately pay off. You step away from execution to design structure. Okay? Too many. This feels unproductive. Even irresponsible. This is why so many people stay stuck at the effort level. They mistake visibility for value. They equate being busy with being effective. Designing systems doesn't look like work. There's no instant reward, no clear metric of progress, just delayed payoff. But once systems are in place, everything changes, results compound. Small inputs produce outsized outcomes. Okay? You move from being the engine to being the architect. Okay? Your role shifts from doing everything to deciding what matters. This transition is uncomfortable because it requires letting go of control. You must accept imperfection. Delegation introduces errors. Automation removes the feeling of personal involvement. And for many, identity is tied to being hands-on, being needed, being the one who makes things happen. Letting go feels like loss, but holding on is what keeps you small. Those who break through understand that effort is a tool, not a strategy. They stop asking how to work harder and start asking how to make work unnecessary. They design environments where progress happens by default, where growth doesn't depend on motivation. This doesn't mean they stop working. It means they work on different problems. Problems that have leverage. Problems that reduce future effort rather than increase present exhaustion. Eventually, success becomes less about intensity and more about alignment. Your actions line up with structures that amplify them. Your focus narrows. Your decision-making improves. You do fewer things, but each thing matters more. This is why success often accelerates after long periods of stagnation. From the outside, it looks sudden. In reality, it's the delayed effect of structural changes, systems quietly compounding beneath the surface. Most people never reach this stage because they can't detach their self-worth from effort. They need to feel tired to feel valuable. They need to suffer to feel deserving. But success doesn't reward suffering. It rewards design. Effort will always be required, but it cannot be the foundation. When effort stops working, it's not a sign to quit. It's a sign to evolve, to shift from doing more to building better. Those who understand this stop chasing burnout as a badge of honor. They build frameworks that support growth without constant sacrifice. And that is when success stops feeling like survival and starts feeling like control. Success doesn't just change what you do. It changes how you see the world. And when your perception shifts, your behavior follows. This is where the real friction begins, not with effort or strategy, but with identity. The person you become on the path to success is rarely the person people expect you to be. At first, the changes are subtle. You speak less, You listen more selectively. Stop reacting to things that used to provoke you. Your standards rise quietly. You tolerate less chaos, less inefficiency, less emotional noise. From the inside, this feels like maturity. From the outside, it feels like distance. People don't always notice growth. They notice deviation. You no longer complain the same way. You no longer bond over frustration. You no longer find comfort in shared pessimism. And because many relationships are built on emotional symmetry, this shift disrupts the balance. You're no longer reinforcing the same narratives. You're challenging them simply by existing differently. This is where misunderstanding begins. People may say, "You've changed." They're right, but not in the way they mean. You didn't change your core values. You changed your tolerance. You stopped negotiating with habits to keep you small. You stopped pretending certain things mattered when they didn't. But to those who remain where you started, this looks like arrogance, or detachment, or betrayal. You'll feel the urge to explain yourself, to clarify that you're still the same person, that you still care, that success hasn't gotten to your head. But explanations rarely work here, because the issue isn't misunderstanding, it's contrast. Your growth highlights their stagnation, and that tension has nowhere comfortable to go. So instead of explaining, you begin to edit yourself. You soften your language. You downplay your ambition. You hide your discipline behind humor. You try to remain recognizable so others feel at ease. And every time you do, you dilute the very traits that are moving you forward. This internal split is exhausting. On one side, the version of you that is evolving, focused, disciplined, forward-looking. On the other, the version that wants to remain accepted, familiar, emotionally accessible. Holding both identities at once drains energy. It forces constant self-monitoring. You're never fully present because you're always adjusting. Eventually, the gap becomes too wide to manage. You begin to realize that recognition is not guaranteed. Some people will never understand who you're becoming because they're attached to who you were. They don't miss you, they miss the version of you that fit into their world without disruption. This is where many people sabotage themselves. They unconsciously revert. They loosen standards. They reintroduce distractions. Slow their progress not because the path is wrong, but because the transformation feels socially costly. But success doesn't negotiate with comfort. Growth demands consistency, and consistency makes change visible. The more disciplined you become, the harder it is to hide. Your routines solidify. Your boundaries sharpen. Your priorities become obvious, and with that visibility comes judgment. You'll be called intense, obsessed, detached, unrelatable. What's really happening is this: you're no longer optimized for approval. You're optimized for alignment. And alignment doesn't require consensus. It requires clarity. This stage forces a hard decision. Do you remain recognizable, or do you remain committed? You cannot fully be both. One preserves familiarity. The other preserves momentum. Those who move forward accept the loss of recognition as part of the cost. They stop trying to be understood by people who no longer share their direction. They allow relationships to recalibrate or dissolve resentment, because the truth is simple and brutal. The version of you capable of achieving more cannot be fully understood by the version of your world that needed you to stay the same. And once you accept that, you stop apologizing for your evolution. There is a moment when progress stops feeling external and starts feeling internal. Your habits have changed. Your standards are higher. Your reactions are different. But the world around you hasn't adjusted yet. And in that gap, identity confusion sets in. You no longer fully relate to who you used to be, but you don't yet feel like the person you're becoming. This in-between state is uncomfortable. You question your behavior. You second-guess your tone. You wonder if you're becoming cold, rigid, or disconnected. Without clear feedback, self-doubt grows. The hardest part of this shift is that it happens silently. There is no ceremony, No clear milestone where you can say, this is who I am now. The change reveals itself in small moments. You choose sleep over socializing. You decline invitations without guilt. You protect your time aggressively. These decisions feel minor, but together they form a new identity. People react to this before you fully understand it yourself. They comment on your seriousness, your absence, your lack of enthusiasm for things that used to excite you. They may joke about you becoming boring or obsessed. These comments aren't always hostile, but they land deeply. They challenge your self-image. They force you to confront the possibility that success is reshaping you in ways you didn't anticipate. This is where many people try to correct course. They reintroduce old habits to prove they haven't changed. Okay? They loosen boundaries. They say yes when they should say no. Not because they want to, but because they're afraid of becoming unrecognizable. But identity doesn't negotiate, solidifies through repetition. Every disciplined choice reinforces the new version of you. Every compromise weakens it. You can't partially become someone else. You either act in alignment with your future self, or you preserve your past one. And the tension between those two versions is what makes this stage so mentally exhausting. Another brutal truth emerges here. Growth often feels like loss before it feels like gain. You lose spontaneity. You lose emotional availability. You lose the ease of drifting through life without direction. In return, you gain focus, structure, momentum. But these gains are subtle at first. They don't offer the emotional payoff people expect. This leads to a dangerous question. Was the old version of me happier? That question is misleading. Happiness is not the same as alignment. Comfort is not the same as fulfillment. The old version of you may have felt lighter, but it was also limited. It was protected from responsibility, but also from potential. The new version carries weight, expectations, pressure, self-imposed standards. That weight can feel oppressive if you don't understand its purpose. It exists to support something larger than immediate pleasure. It exists to make progress inevitable. This is where resilience replaces enthusiasm. You stop relying on emotional highs to sustain effort. You operate on principle, on routine, on commitment to long-term outcomes. And that makes you appear different, less reactive, less expressive, less available. Some people will interpret this as a loss of warmth. Others will interpret it as superiority. Very few will recognize it as discipline. And that misunderstanding is painful, especially when it comes from people you care about. But here's the reality. You cannot grow without changing the way you show up in the world. Identity evolution is not optional. It's the mechanism through which success becomes possible. The cost is friction, confusion, occasional loneliness. Those who survive this stage stop asking for permission to become who they need to be. They stop checking whether their evolution makes others comfortable. They accept that being misunderstood is a side effect of moving forward. Eventually, the internal alignment catches up with the external behavior. The new identity stabilizes. You no longer feel split. You no longer explain yourself internally. You move with quiet certainty. And when that happens, the noise fades. Not because others approve, because you no longer need them to. There's a quiet moment when something inside you shifts. Not dramatically, not with confidence or pride. Just a subtle realization. Trying to be liked is costing you too much. It's too much energy, too much focus, it's too much integrity. Up until this point, you've been negotiating your behavior, softening your opinions, managing your image, choosing words carefully so you don't seem too intense, too distant, too different. You've been calibrating yourself for acceptance, and it's exhausting. Success makes this impossible to maintain. As your standards rise, pretending becomes heavier. You feel the friction every time you say yes when you mean no. Every time you stay silent to avoid discomfort. Every time you dilute your ambition to make it easier for others to digest. Accumulate. They erode self-respect. At some point, the internal cost outweighs the social benefit. You begin to notice how conditional approval really is. People like you when you're predictable, when you reinforce their worldview, when your progress doesn't challenge their identity. It's the moment you deviate, approval becomes fragile, and building your life on something so unstable starts to feel dangerous, so you stop chasing it. Not aggressively, not with resentment. You simply stop prioritizing it. You choose alignment over likability. You speak less, but more honestly. You engage selectively. You let misunderstandings exist without rushing to correct them. This is uncomfortable at first. You feel exposed. Without the safety net of approval, insecurity surfaces. You wonder if you're becoming isolated unnecessarily, if you're pushing people away. But slowly, something stabilizes. The constant background anxiety fades. The need to perform disappears. You realize that most of your social tension came from self-betrayal, not rejection. When you stop trying to be liked, relationships clarify. Some strengthen, others weaken. A few disappear entirely. And while that loss hurts, it's cleaner than constant negotiation. You no longer wonder where you stand. You no longer manage perception. You allow reality to sort itself out. This shift changes how you move through the world. You become harder to manipulate, less reactive to criticism, less dependent on praise. You don't need to defend your choices constantly because you're no longer asking for approval. This doesn't make you arrogant. It makes you grounded. You still care about people, but you no longer confuse caring with compliance. You understand that respect doesn't come from being agreeable. It comes from being consistent, from showing up the same way regardless of who's watching. This is when confidence stops being performative and becomes structural. It's built into your decisions, it's into your routines, into your boundaries. You don't announce it, you don't explain it, you embody it. From the outside, this can look cold, detached, even intimidating. But internally, it feels calm, clean. You're no longer fragmented by competing identities. You're no longer living multiple versions of yourself, depending on the room. This is the version of you that can sustain success, because long-term success is incompatible with people-pleasing. It requires decisions that won't be popular, boundaries that won't be applauded, priorities that won't be understood. If your self-worth depends on approval, you'll eventually abandon the path. Those who move forward accept a hard truth. Being respected by the wrong people is a liability. Being liked by everyone is a distraction. Success doesn't require you to be admired. It requires you to be consistent. When you stop trying to be liked, you reclaim enormous amounts of energy, mental space, emotional bandwidth. That energy gets redirected into creation, into focus, into long-term thinking. You stop reacting and start building. And somewhere in that process, something unexpected happens. The right people begin to appear. Not many, but aligned. They don't need explanations. They recognize the discipline, the clarity, the restraint. Connection becomes rarer, but deeper. You didn't lose people because you became worse. You lost them because you became more precise. And once you experience the peace of alignment, you understand why success demands this stage. Because you cannot build something meaningful while constantly negotiating who you are allowed to be. Motivation is how most people begin. Discipline is how a few continue. In the early stages, motivation feels powerful. It gives you momentum. It makes effort feel light. You consume content that excites you. You imagine a different future. You feel energized by possibility. But motivation is emotional, and emotions are unstable. They fluctuate with sleep, stress, validation, and mood. And success cannot be built on something that unreliable. At some point, motivation fades, not because you stopped believing, but because novelty disappears. The work becomes repetitive. The results lag. The excitement that once pushed you forward no longer shows up on command. It's where most people stall. They wait to feel ready again. They wait for inspiration to return. And while they wait, nothing moves. Discipline doesn't wait. Discipline operates without emotional agreement. It doesn't ask whether you feel like it. It doesn't negotiate with resistance. It turns action into routine, and routine into identity. Okay. When discipline replaces motivation, progress becomes boring and inevitable. This transition feels like loss at first. You miss the excitement, the rush, the sense of purpose driven by emotion. Discipline feels dry, mechanical, uninspiring. You worry that something is wrong because the passion isn't there anymore. But what's actually happening is stabilization. Motivation is volatile. Discipline is stable. Discipline doesn't spike, it compounds. Small actions repeated consistently outperform intense bursts followed by inaction. This is why disciplined people often appear calm. They're not chasing highs, executing systems. The hardest part of discipline is that it offers no emotional reward up front. You don't feel proud for showing up. You don't feel special. You simply do what needs to be done. And because there's no immediate payoff, the ego resists. The mind looks for reasons to delay, to optimize, to postpone. This is where structure becomes essential. You reduce decision-making. You remove friction. You design your environment to support action rather than relying on willpower. Discipline is not about being strong. It's about being prepared. Over time, something shifts, okay? You stop associating action with mood. You don't ask how you feel before working, okay? You work and your feelings adjust afterward, okay? This reversal is subtle but powerful. She leads emotion, not the other way around. Discipline also changes how you see failure. You no longer interpret missed days as personal flaws. You treat them as system errors. You adjust to structure instead of criticizing yourself. This detachment protects momentum. As discipline deepens, identity changes. You no longer see yourself as someone who tries. You see yourself as someone who does. That shift removes friction. Action becomes default. Excuses lose credibility. This is when motivation becomes irrelevant. You don't need it anymore. You've built a framework that carries you forward even when enthusiasm disappears. Progress continues quietly, steadily, without drama. Most people never reach this stage because they romanticize motivation. They want success to feel exciting, meaningful, emotional, but discipline feels neutral, and neutrality is often mistaken for lack of purpose. In reality, discipline is purpose in its most mature form. It's commitment without mood, action without reassurance. And once it takes over, success stops being dependent on how you feel and starts being dependent on who you've decided to become. Once discipline takes over, something unexpected happens. The journey becomes boring, not peaceful. It's not easy. Boring. The dramatic highs disappear. The emotional swings flatten. Days start to look the same. Work becomes repetitive. And for many people, this is where commitment quietly erodes. No one warns you that consistency feels empty. You were conditioned to associate progress with excitement, with visible wins, with emotional feedback. Discipline removes all of that. It reduces life to execution. You wake up, you do the work, you go to sleep, and the next day looks exactly the same. This monotony creates a subtle thread. Without emotional stimulation, the mind searches for novelty. Distraction becomes tempting. You start questioning whether you're wasting your life in routine. You wonder if success is supposed to feel more alive than this. This is where most people self-sabotage, not through laziness, but through restlessness. They introduce chaos to feel something. They change direction too early. They chase new strategies. They look for shortcuts. It's not because the system isn't working, but because boredom feels like stagnation. But boredom is not stagnation. It's a byproduct of stability. When you remove emotional volatility, progress becomes less visible, but more reliable. You stop measuring success by how you feel and start measuring it by what you produce over time. That requires patience most people don't develop. Boredom is where discipline is tested, not by difficulty, but by repetition. Anyone can push through pain. Few can tolerate sameness, and yet, sameness is where mastery is built. High performers understand this. They don't rely on excitement. They rely on standards. They create routines that remove choice. They make progress automatic. And because of that, their success appears effortless from the outside. The danger is misinterpreting boredom as a sign to stop. Many people assume that if something feels dull, it must be wrong. They abandon systems that would have paid off simply because the emotional return diminished. But discipline was never meant to be entertaining. It was meant to be effective. This is where emotional maturity becomes critical. You learn to sit with neutrality without trying to escape it. You stop seeking stimulation from your work. You find meaning in consistency, not excitement. Over time, boredom reshapes your mind, builds tolerance for long-term effort, teaches you to detach self-worth from novelty. You stop needing constant feedback. You become internally regulated. This is a quiet strength. Most people want success to feel like a movie. Highs, lows, turning points. In reality, success feels like maintenance, repetition, quiet accumulation, and the ones who accept that reality gain an enormous advantage. Boredom filters people out more effectively than difficulty. It removes those who need drama to stay engaged. Those who confuse motion with progress. Those who quit not because they can't continue, but because they don't feel entertained. If you can survive boredom, you can outlast almost anyone. Because boredom means the system is working. It means you've removed chaos. It means progress is happening beneath the surface. And those who understand this stop searching for excitement. They trust the process. This is when discipline stops feeling heavy and starts feeling natural. You no longer fight resistance. You operate on autopilot. And in that state, time does the work for you. Success doesn't require passion every day. It requires tolerance for boredom over long periods of time. And that tolerance is what separates those who finish from those who endlessly restart. There is a phase in every long pursuit where it feels like nothing is happening. You're disciplined, you're consistent, you're showing up, and yet, externally, there is no movement, no breakthrough, no visible progress. This is one of the most dangerous stages, not because it's hard, but because it's quiet. Human psychology struggles with silence. We expect response. We want feedback. When effort produces nothing measurable, doubt grows. You start questioning your approach, your ability, your judgment, even your goals. The temptation is to assume you're stuck, or worse, that you're doing it wrong. But silence is not stagnation. In many processes, progress happens underground before it appears above the surface. Skills compound. Systems stabilize. Habits solidify. None of this is visible. And because it's invisible, it's easy to dismiss. You underestimate how much groundwork is being laid because there's no immediate reward. This is where discipline proves its value. It's not by pushing harder, but by maintaining consistency without emotional reinforcement. You keep executing without confirmation. You trust the structure you've built, even when results lag behind effort. Most people can't tolerate this gap. They interpret the absence of feedback as failure. They change strategies prematurely. They abandon systems just before they would have started working. They mistake patience for passivity and silence for rejection. But success rarely announces itself early. It arrives late, often after long periods of apparent inactivity. Those who understand this stop demanding immediate results. They focus on process quality rather than outcome frequency. Doing the work when nothing is happening requires a different kind of confidence. Not confidence in results, but confidence in self-governance. You trust your ability to stay consistent without external validation. You believe in your capacity to endure uncertainty. This builds psychological strength that compounds beyond any single goal. You become someone who doesn't panic in quiet periods, someone who doesn't overreact to slow cycles. Someone who understands timing. Over time, this calm becomes an asset. While others oscillate between bursts of effort and collapse, you maintain steady pressure. And steady pressure reshapes reality. When results finally appear, they often do so suddenly, not gradually, but in clusters. Opportunities align. Momentum accelerates. From the outside, it looks like overnight success. From the inside, it feels overdue. But this outcome is only possible because you stayed when nothing was happening. You didn't abandon the process when it stopped feeding your ego. You didn't require constant proof to continue. Most people need to see progress to believe. It's the ones who succeed believe long enough to see progress. This stage refines your relationship with time. You stop expecting immediate payoff. You think in longer horizons. You measure success in months and years, not days and weeks. This shift alone separates you from the majority. Doing the work in silence teaches you patience without passivity. You remain active, but not anxious. You move forward without rushing. You allow outcomes to mature. Eventually, the silence breaks. But by then, you're no longer dependent on noise. You've learned to operate in its absence, and that ability makes your progress resilient. Because once you can work without applause, without excitement, without visible reward, nothing can easily pull you off course. Discipline isn't proven when things are moving. It's proven when they aren't. And those who understand this finish what they start. Most people believe success will fix them, that more money, more freedom, more recognition will smooth out their insecurities. That confidence will replace doubt. That achievement will quiet the inner tension. This belief is comforting and completely wrong. Success doesn't heal flaws. It amplifies them. In the early stages, struggle hides your weaknesses. Limited resources justify impatience, lack of control, excuses inconsistency. External pressure gives you someone to blame. But as you gain momentum, those buffers disappear. You have more options, more autonomy, more responsibility. And with that freedom, your patterns become undeniable. If you're impatient, success makes you reckless. If you're insecure, success makes you defensive. If you crave control, success makes you rigid. There's nowhere to hide when you're no longer constrained by circumstance. This is where many people become confused. They expected relief. Instead, they feel exposed. Old habits resurface in sharper forms. Emotional reactions intensify. Small flaws create large consequences. And because success raises the stakes, mistakes cost more. Pressure reveals character. As your influence grows, your behavior carries weight. How you handle stress matters. How you make decisions matters. How you treat others matters. Traits that were once manageable become liabilities. And if you haven't addressed them, success will force the issue. This is why some people self-destruct right after a breakthrough. Not because they weren't ready for opportunity, but because they weren't ready for themselves. They confuse external progress with internal development. And when the two aren't aligned, friction turns into collapse. Self-awareness becomes unavoidable at this stage. You can no longer ignore emotional triggers. You can no longer rationalize destructive habits. The feedback loop tightens. Stakes are immediate. Consequences are visible. This can feel brutal. You're doing better than ever, yet confronting parts of yourself you hoped success would erase. The illusion shatters. Achievement doesn't transform you, it reveals you. Those who continue learn a hard lesson. Personal growth cannot be outsourced to success. You have to do the internal work deliberately. Reflection, regulation, responsibility. Without it, progress becomes unstable. This is where maturity separates outcomes. Some double down on denial. They blame others. They harden. They protect their ego instead of refining their behavior. Their success becomes brittle, impressive on the surface, fragile underneath. Others choose refinement. They confront their patterns, but they slow down to correct internal misalignment. They treat flaws as data, not identity. This path is quieter, slower, and far less glamorous, but infinitely more sustainable. Success exposes flaws so they can be addressed, not ignored. It creates a mirror that doesn't flatter. And the willingness to look honestly into that mirror determines how far you can go. Because at higher levels, skill opens doors, but character decides whether you stay. As success grows, so does influence. Your decisions affect more people. Your mistakes ripple wider, and the margin for error shrinks. This is when weaknesses stop being personal problems and start becoming structural risks. As power doesn't change who you are, it removes constraints. When your time was limited, flaws were contained. When your reach expands, they echo. As impatience turns into volatility, avoidance turns into neglect, ego turns into isolation. Traits that once only affected you now shape environments, teams, outcomes. This is where many people lose perspective. They assume their authority validates their instincts. They stop questioning themselves. They mistake confidence for clarity. And because success often silences criticism, blind spots grow unchecked. Early struggle is loud. Feedback is constant. Failure corrects behavior quickly. Success, on the other hand, is quiet. People hesitate to challenge you. They soften feedback. They protect your egos sometimes for their own survival. And that silence is dangerous. You start hearing only echoes of your own thinking. If you're insecure, you surround yourself with agreement. If you're controlling, you centralize decisions. If you fear failure, you avoid risk while pretending to be strategic. These patterns don't announce themselves as weaknesses. They present as preferences, as leadership styles, as personal standards. And because results may still be coming in, there's little incentive to change. This is why success often plateaus at higher levels. Not because the person lacks skill, but because their internal limitations have scaled with their influence. The system becomes an extension of their psychology. At this stage, humility becomes a competitive advantage. It's not performative humility, but functional humility, the ability to question your assumptions and invite challenge. This is rare because power makes vulnerability feel optional. But ignoring weakness doesn't remove it. It concentrates it. Those who last develop structures that compensate for their flaws. They build feedback loops. They delegate authority. They surround themselves with people who disagree intelligently. They treat self-awareness as an operational necessity, not a personal luxury. This requires courage, because confronting weaknesses threatens identity. It forces you to admit that success didn't make you complete, that it didn't resolve your internal conflicts, that you still need correction. Those who avoid this work often protect their image at the expense of progress. They cling to control. They suppress dissent. They rationalize stagnation. Eventually, the system collapses under the weight of unaddressed flaws. The irony is that success offers the resources to fix weaknesses: time, money, access, perspective. But it also offers enough comfort to ignore them. The choice determines whether growth continues or stalls. Its power magnifies everything: skill, vision, discipline, but also insecurity, impulsiveness, avoidance, without intentional refinement. Success becomes a megaphone for your worst traits. Those who recognize this treat internal development as seriously as external execution. They understand that mastery is not just about expanding capability, but about reducing internal friction. Because, at scale, your greatest obstacle is no longer the world, it's you. At a certain level of success, strategy stops being the limiting factor. Opportunity is present. Resources are available. Talent is within reach. And yet, progress slows or collapses. When this happens, the cause is rarely external. It's internal. You can't outgrow unresolved patterns. Early on, self-work feels optional. You can push through flaws with effort. You can compensate with hustle. You can ignore emotional blind spots because the stakes are low. But as success increases, tolerance decreases. Small misalignments create outsized damage. What was once manageable becomes destabilizing. This is where self-work stops being philosophical and becomes practical. Emotional regulation matters because stress compounds at scale. Decision-making matters because mistakes are expensive. Self-awareness matters because blind spots grow with authority. Ignoring these elements doesn't just limit growth, it puts everything at risk. Many people resist this stage because it feels intangible. You can't measure self-work the way you measure output. There are no clear metrics, no immediate returns. And for individuals conditioned to value productivity, this feels inefficient. But internal stability is a form of infrastructure. Without it, everything you build rests on unstable ground. Relationships fracture. Teams lose trust. Focus erodes. The external signs may appear slowly, but the internal damage compounds quietly. Those who move forward redefine what work means. They invest in reflection and feedback, in emotional literacy. They learn how they respond under pressure. They study their triggers. They build routines that protect clarity, not just productivity. This isn't about becoming softer. It's about becoming precise. Self-work sharpens decision-making. It reduces reactivity. It creates space between impulse and action, And that space is where good leadership lives, where long-term thinking becomes possible. Those who avoid this stage often double down on execution. They push harder. They optimize systems. They chase external fixes for internal problems. And when those fixes fail, they become frustrated, defensive, or burned out. Those who embrace self-work gain durability. They recover faster. They adapt better. They don't collapse under pressure because they understand their own limits and design around them. This stage also reframes success itself. It stops being about accumulation and starts being about sustainability. You realize that the goal isn't to build something impressive. It's to build something that doesn't destroy you in the process. Self-work introduces restraint. You say no more often. You choose battles carefully. You protect your mental bandwidth. From the outside, this can look like slowing down. In reality, it's refinement. The people who reach the highest levels understand that growth is no longer about expansion. It's about reduction, reducing friction, reducing ego, reducing unnecessary complexity. And in that reduction, clarity emerges. You become harder to destabilize, less reactive to noise, more deliberate in action. And that composure compounds into trust, influence, and longevity. Self-work is not self-indulgence. It's responsibility. Responsibility for the impact you have, for the systems you shape, for the outcomes you create. At scale, success is no longer about what you can do. It's about who you can be without collapsing. Those who accept this don't just reach success, they sustain it. Money is often treated as a solution, a cure for stress, a gateway to freedom, a shield against insecurity. People believe that once financial pressure is removed, clarity will follow, peace will arrive, problems will dissolve. That belief doesn't survive contact with reality. Money removes constraints, not complexity. It takes away urgency, but it introduces choice, and choice exposes character. When you no longer have to act, you discover why you were acting in the first place. If you were driven by fear, money doesn't erase, it amplifies it. If you are motivated by validation, money makes the hunger louder. If you are escaping discomfort, money removes the escape and leaves you with yourself. Financial freedom doesn't create inner freedom. It reveals whether it already existed. This is why some people become more anxious after achieving wealth without survival pressure. Unresolved issues surface. Identity confusion intensifies. Relationships strain. The distractions that once numbed dissatisfaction disappear. Money gives you time, and time magnifies what you've been avoiding. In the early stages, financial goals provide structure. You know what you're chasing. You know why you're working. But once money arrives, that structure dissolves. You no longer need to push. You no longer need to prove anything. And without a deeper anchor, direction fades. This is where many people feel lost. They expected relief. Instead, they feel emptiness. The achievement that was supposed to validate their struggle leaves them questioning what it was all for. Okay? And because this experience contradicts the narrative of success, it's rarely discussed openly. Money also changes social dynamics. It alters power, expectations, and perception. People treat you differently, become distant, others become dependent. Motives blur. Trust becomes harder to establish. And if you haven't developed internal boundaries, these shifts destabilize you. Those who believe money will simplify life are unprepared for this complexity. Financial freedom requires psychological maturity. Without it, wealth becomes another source of stress rather than a release. Money reveals your relationship with control. If you crave certainty, you may hoard. If you fear loss, you may obsess. If you seek status, you may overspend. The behaviors that once felt harmless become exaggerated. This is why financial success without internal alignment often leads to self-sabotage. People burn through resources. They make impulsive decisions. They chase stimulation to fill the void left by removed struggle. Not because they're irresponsible, but because they're unprepared for freedom. Those who navigate this stage well redefine the role of money. They stop seeing it as an end and start treating it as a tool, a means to create space, not identity. They build routines, goals, and structures that give money purpose rather than letting it dictate behavior. They understand that money doesn't make life meaningful. It makes life adjustable. And without intention, adjustment leads nowhere. Money reveals who you are when you no longer have to fight. And if you haven't built something solid internally, that revelation can be unsettling. One of the most dangerous myths about money is the belief that it creates safety, that a certain number will finally let you relax, that once you reach it, fear will disappear. This illusion drives relentless accumulation, but it never delivers what it promises. Money reduces some risks. The T does not eliminate uncertainty. As income grows, so does awareness. You see more possibilities and more threats, more opportunities to lose what you've built, more variables to manage, more responsibility. The comfort people expect from wealth is often replaced by vigilance. Security, it turns out, is not financial, psychological. If your sense of safety depends on external conditions, it will always be fragile. Markets change, relationships shift, health fluctuates. Money can buffer impact, but it can't guarantee stability. Those who rely on wealth for peace find themselves constantly monitoring it, protecting it, fearing its erosion. This is where anxiety hides behind affluence. People with money often feel pressured to maintain their status, to justify their position, to avoid appearing careless or undeserving. This pressure creates conservative behavior, risk avoidance, overprotection. Ironically, the pursuit of safety begins to limit growth. The illusion deepens when people tie their identity to their net worth. Money becomes proof of intelligence, competence, or superiority. And once identity is attached, loss becomes existential. A financial setback doesn't just hurt, it threatens self-worth. This is why some wealthy individuals become rigid, defensive, resistant to change. They stop experimenting, cling to what worked before. It's not because it's optimal, but because it feels safe. True security doesn't come from accumulation. It comes from adaptability. Those who understand this invest in skills, not just assets. They build confidence in their ability to recover, not just to protect. They trust their judgment more than their balance sheet. And because of that, they remain flexible under pressure. Money also distorts time perception. When resources are scarce, time feels urgent. When resources are abundant, time can feel infinite. This false sense of permanence leads to complacency, delayed decisions, missed opportunities. The urgency that once fueled growth disappears. Those who succeed long-term maintain a sense of intentional pressure, not panic, but purpose. They create constraints even when they don't need to. They set goals that require engagement. They stay mentally sharp. Security, when misunderstood, becomes stagnation. The people who navigate wealth well detach their emotional state from financial fluctuation. They accept volatility as part of reality. They don't chase perfect stability. They build resilience instead. This shift is subtle but powerful. It moves you from fear-based preservation to confidence-based participation. You stop guarding life and start engaging with it again. Money can buy comfort. It can buy options. It can buy time. But it cannot buy peace if your sense of safety depends on it. The illusion of security fades when you realize that no amount of wealth can protect you from uncertainty. Only competence, clarity, and adaptability can. There is a moment, often unspoken, when financial success loses its emotional charge. The numbers grow. The lifestyle upgrades. The external markers of achievement are in place. And yet, something feels hollow. This is not ingratitude, it's misalignment. Money is a powerful amplifier, but it cannot generate meaning on its own. It can remove struggle, but it cannot tell you what to struggle for. Without a deeper framework, wealth becomes maintenance rather than progress. Many people reach financial comfort and then stall psychologically. The urgency that once drove them disappears. Calls become abstract. Days blur together. Without constraint, direction dissolves. This is where emptiness creeps in. People try to fill it with consumption, experiences, status, novelty, but these only provide temporary stimulation. The underlying void remains because it's not a resource problem, it's a purpose problem. Wealth magnifies this because it removes excuses. You can no longer blame circumstances. You have time. You have options. And with that freedom comes responsibility. The responsibility to choose meaning. Those who avoid this responsibility drift. They stay busy but unfulfilled. They accumulate more. Not because they need it, but because accumulation gives structure. It keeps the question of why at a distance. But accumulation without intention becomes circular. It never resolves the deeper tension. It only delays it. Those who move forward redefine success at this stage. They stop asking how much they can gain and start asking what they want to build, contribute, or shape. Meaning becomes directional. It anchors action. This doesn't require grand missions or public impact. It requires coherence between values and behavior, between effort and outcome. Wealth becomes a tool to support that coherence, not a substitute for it. People who find meaning after wealth often become quieter, less performative, less concerned with optics. They focus on depth rather than display. Their decisions are guided by internal alignment rather than external validation. This is why some of the most fulfilled individuals with wealth appear modest. They've decoupled identity from accumulation. They no longer need money to justify their existence. Wealth without meaning is not neutral, it's corrosive. The T erodes motivation. It blurs values. It creates a sense of motion without progress. And over time, that erodes mental health. Meaning restores structure. It reintroduces challenge. It gives wealth a role rather than letting it dominate the narrative. Those who understand this don't retire from effort. They redirect it. They engage in work that stretches them differently. They choose projects that demand integrity, not just intelligence. Money doesn't end the journey. It changes the question. And if you're not prepared to answer that question, wealth becomes a dead end rather than a milestone. True success is not what you accumulate after struggle. It's what you choose to pursue once struggle is optional. And that choice determines whether wealth becomes freedom, a trap. There is a cost to focus that no one likes to admit. While you're building one life deliberately, countless other versions of life are quietly passing you by. And at some point, usually when momentum slows or silence sets in, you become aware of them. Not with regret, with weight. You think about the weekends you didn't take, the friendships you let fade, the spontaneity you traded for structure, the easier paths you could have chosen. None of this means your decision was wrong. Pretending there was no loss is dishonest. Every committed path excludes others. Success demands prioritization, and prioritization creates absence. You cannot say yes to everything and still move forward with force. You chose discipline over comfort, direction over drift. In those choices, closed doors you will never reopen. Most people avoid acknowledging this because it feels dangerous. They believe that admitting loss weakens resolve. In reality, denying it creates resentment. Unspoken grief turns into quiet bitterness if it's not confronted. You don't miss those lives because they were better. You miss them because they were possible. The difference. As progress compounds, the contrast becomes clearer. You see people living lives that look lighter, less structured, more socially full. Okay? And for a moment, you wonder if you overcorrected, if the cost was too high. This thought often appears when things are quiet, when there's no immediate reward. When you're tired, it's not a signal to quit, it's a signal that you're human. Ambition narrows your world before it expands it. During the building phase, life contracts, options reduce, margins shrink. Everything revolves around the objective. Its intensity is temporary, but it's long enough to leave a mark. Okay? And during that time, you live without balance. Okay? Balance is a luxury of later stages. The danger is romanticizing the paths you didn't take. You imagine freedom without responsibility, connection without compromise, joy without effort. But every life carries its own trade-offs. You're only seeing the surface of those alternatives, not their cost. Still, the sense of absence is real. You don't grieve a single loss, you grieve multiplicity. The idea that choosing one identity required letting go of many others, that's not weakness, that's awareness. Those who mature through this stage don't dismiss the feeling. They contextualize it. They understand that longing doesn't mean misalignment, means commitment has weight. What breaks people here is comparison, measuring their disciplined life against someone else's visible ease. They forget that ease is curated, that struggle is hidden, that fulfillment isn't evenly distributed. You can build something meaningful and still feel moments of envy. These emotions are not contradictions, okay? They are the byproduct of choosing depth over breadth. Acknowledging this doesn't slow you down, stabilizes you, okay? It allows you to move forward without suppressing parts of yourself, without pretending that sacrifice was painless, okay? You didn't miss out because you failed to live, okay? You missed out because you chose to live deliberately, okay? And understanding that distinction is what allows you to continue without bitterness. There is a form of grief that doesn't come from loss, but from choice. It doesn't arrive with shock or sadness. It settles slowly in the background as awareness. The awareness that by committing deeply to one path, you have permanently excluded others. This grief is subtle, easy to dismiss, easy to rationalize away, but it doesn't disappear just because you ignore it. Commitment closes doors quietly. You don't notice it at first. You're too busy building, too focused on progress, too immersed in execution. But eventually, you reach a moment of stillness, a pause. And in that pause, the weight of what you didn't choose becomes visible. You think about the relationships that never formed, okay? The cities you never lived in, the versions of yourself that existed only briefly before being replaced by discipline. These aren't regrets, Nate. They're acknowledgments. Most people never experience this grief because they never commit deeply enough to feel it. They keep their options open. They float. They sample life without anchoring to anything long enough for it to cost them something real. But death always comes with loss. When you choose mastery, you give up mediocrity in many areas. When you choose structure, you give up spontaneity. When you choose long-term outcomes, you give up short-term freedom. None of these sacrifices are dramatic. They're cumulative, and over time, they shape a life that is narrower but deeper. The problem arises when people expect commitment to feel rewarding at all times. They believe that clarity should eliminate doubt, that purpose should eliminate longing. It doesn't. It refines it. Longing doesn't disappear when you commit. It changes direction. You stop longing for everything. You long for coherence, for meaning that justifies the cost. And when progress feels slow, that longing sharpens. You question whether the return will ever match the investment. This is where emotional honesty matters. Pretending you don't feel the weight of sacrifice disconnects you from yourself. It creates internal tension. You become rigid, defensive, unable to adapt because admitting complexity feels like weakness. Those who navigate this stage well allow the grief to exist without letting it control them. They don't romanticize the lives they didn't live, but they respect the fact that those lives were real possibilities. They accept that choosing one path doesn't invalidate the others, simply prioritizes one. This acceptance brings maturity. You stop needing constant justification for your choices. You don't inflate success to compensate for loss. You let the trade-offs stand as they are. And in doing so, you become grounded. The quiet grief of commitment is not a sign of doubt. It's a sign of seriousness. It means you understood the cost and paid it anyway. People who avoid this grief often chase balance prematurely. They dilute their focus. They reopen doors that needed to stay closed. Not because they want those paths, but because they can't tolerate the feeling of finality. Finality is uncomfortable. It's also powerful. When you accept that some doors are permanently closed, your energy consolidates. You stop leaking attention into alternatives. You become more present in the life you're actually living. This is where fulfillment deepens. Not because everything feels good, but because everything feels intentional. The grief fades, not because you forgot what you gave up, but because what you're building starts to feel worthy of the cost. Meaning replaces comparison. Depth replaces breadth. And you realize something most people never do. A life without sacrifice feels light, but it also feels thin. A life with commitment feels heavy, but it holds weight. At some point, something shifts. The lives you once wondered about lose their emotional pull. Not because they were illusions, but because you finally see them clearly. You understand that every path carries its own constraints. That freedom always comes with cost. That ease is never free. Romanticizing other lives is easy when you only see fragments, highlight reels, moments of laughter, apparent simplicity. But fragments hide the structure underneath, the compromises, the stagnation, the unspoken dissatisfaction. When you commit deeply, your perspective sharpens. You stop comparing based on aesthetics and start comparing based on substance. You ask different questions. What does this life demand over 10 years? What does it sacrifice? What does it quietly tolerate? And when you do that, the appeal fades. This doesn't make you superior. It makes you informed. You realize that many of the lives you once envied traded depth for comfort, stability for growth, longing for autonomy. That doesn't make them wrong. It makes them different. And difference no longer threatens you. This is where peace begins to replace longing. You no longer need to justify your choices by diminishing others. You don't need to convince yourself you chose the best path. Simply accept that you chose a path that aligned with who you were becoming. Clarity eliminates envy. When your life has direction, other directions lose their pull. When your effort has meaning, alternative uses of time feel irrelevant. You stop asking what if because you're too engaged with what is. This stage brings quiet confidence, not loud pride. Not certainty, but stability. You stop scanning for exits. You stop keeping backups emotionally available. You commit fully to the life you're building. And with that commitment, your energy changes. You move forward without hesitation, without nostalgia pulling you backward, without fantasizing about parallel lives that no longer matter. The past becomes a reference, not a temptation. This doesn't mean you never wonder. It means wondering no longer destabilizes you. You can acknowledge other possibilities without needing to explore them. You can appreciate different lives without wishing you were living them. That's maturity. It's the moment when focus stops feeling restrictive and starts feeling freeing. When the narrowness of your path no longer feels like loss, but like depth. When you realize that fulfillment doesn't come from having many options, it comes from fully inhabiting one. Most people never reach this stage because they never commit long enough for clarity to emerge. They live half choices, half lives, always wondering, never anchored. But those who stay long enough experience something rare. The relief of alignment, calm of coherence. The confidence that comes from knowing your sacrifices weren't accidental. You didn't miss out on other lives. You chose the one you were meant to build. And once you see that clearly, the noise fades. Freedom is one of the most misunderstood rewards of success. It's often imagined as lightness, ease, the absence of constraint. But real freedom doesn't feel like release. It feels like weight. When you remove external limits, you don't become free, you become responsible. No boss to blame. No structure to hide behind. No schedule imposed from the outside. Every decision becomes yours. And with that ownership comes pressure most people are unprepared for. In structured environments, pressure is distributed. Rules guide behavior. Expectations limit choice. Failure has boundaries. Freedom removes those buffers. It hands you possibility without instruction. And possibility is heavy. This is why some people sabotage themselves after gaining autonomy. They procrastinate. They overindulge. They drift. Not because they're lazy, but because they're overwhelmed by unstructured choice. Freedom demands self-governance. You must decide when to work, what to prioritize, when to rest, what matters. There is no default. No good enough defined by someone else. And without internal standards, freedom becomes paralysis. The pressure intensifies because outcomes are directly tied to your decisions. When things go well, credit is yours. When they fail, blame has nowhere to go. This level of accountability is exhausting if you're not prepared for it. As people want freedom from responsibility, success offers freedom with responsibility. That difference is everything. Pressure and freedom is constant, but subtle. There's no urgency pushing you forward. No external consequences forcing action. You have to create pressure intentionally or risk stagnation. This is where discipline evolves into leadership of the self. Those who thrive under freedom build constraints deliberately. They create routines, deadlines, and expectations to replace external structure. They understand that freedom without boundaries is chaos. But even with structure, the psychological load remains. Every choice carries opportunity cost. Every yes eliminates other possibilities. Because the field is open, decision fatigue accumulates. This is the price of autonomy. You realize that freedom doesn't reduce stress, redistributes it. Instead of dealing with imposed demands, you deal with internal conflict. Instead of responding to pressure, you generate it. Some people long to return to structure because it feels simpler, because it removes the burden of choice. They confuse relief with regression. Those who adapt accept that freedom is not comfortable. It's clarifying. It forces you to confront your values, priorities, and limits without mediation. Pressure under freedom is what sharpens judgment. It reveals what you care about. It forces you to define success for yourself rather than inheriting it from others. This stage demands maturity. You can't drift. You can't hide. You can't outsource direction. You must become the architect of your own constraints. Those who do gain something rare, it's not ease, but agency. The ability to shape life deliberately, rather than reactively. Freedom comes with pressure, because pressure is what keeps freedom from collapsing into emptiness. And once you understand that, you stop chasing comfort and start building control. Module 9, Segment 2, The Weight of Choice. When freedom expands, so does choice. And choice, contrary to popular belief, is not liberating by default. It's demanding. Every option requires evaluation. Every decision carries consequence. And when nothing is chosen for you, hesitation becomes costly. In constrained systems, choice is limited. Paths are defined. Decisions are pre-made. You react more than you decide. Freedom removes that scaffolding. You are no longer responding to a script, you are writing one in real time. This is where pressure concentrates. With more options comes more uncertainty. You can always do something else. You can always pivot. You can always optimize. And that endless possibility makes commitments harder. You delay decisions, not because you lack information, but because you fear closing doors. This leads to a subtle paralysis. You spend more time thinking than acting. You research instead of executing. You plan instead of committing. Because freedom allows delay without immediate penalty. Stagnation feels deceptively safe, but in freedom, inaction compounds faster than failure. The weight of choice also reshapes accountability. You can't hide behind, I had no choice. Every outcome traces back to your decisions. That level of ownership can feel oppressive if you're not grounded in your values. Those who struggle here often search for external validation. They ask for advice constantly. They look for consensus. They hope someone else will confirm the right choice. But freedom doesn't offer certainty. It offers responsibility. To operate under freedom, you must develop decision confidence, not certainty confidence, the ability to choose without perfect information and adapt quickly when wrong. This skill is rarely taught. It's learned through exposure, through making decisions, living with them, adjusting, and repeating. Those who avoid this cycle remain trapped in overthinking. Choice also amplifies fear of regret. With many options, it's easy to imagine better alternatives. You second-guess decisions. You replay scenarios. You wonder what might have been. And this mental noise erodes focus. Those who thrive learn to limit choice intentionally. They simplify. They commit to fewer paths. They reduce optionality to protect momentum. Paradoxically, less choice creates more progress. This is not about limiting freedom. It's about directing it. Freedom without focus is exhausting. Freedom with structure is powerful. People who master this stage stop asking which option is best and start asking which option they're willing to fully commit to. Commitment transforms choice from burden into direction. The weight of choice never disappears, but it becomes manageable when decisions are aligned with clear values. Values act as filters. They reduce complexity. They turn infinite options into a finite set of meaningful ones. Without values, choice feels overwhelming. With values, choice feels purposeful. This is the discipline of freedom. Not doing whatever you want, but choosing deliberately what you will not do. Those who understand this stop fearing decisions. They accept imperfection. They move forward with intent. And because they act, they learn faster than those who wait. Freedom is not the absence of limits. It's the ability to choose your limits. There is a moment when you realize something unsettling. Freedom can feel heavier than the life you escaped. It's not because the old life was better, but because it was simpler. The rules were clear. The expectations were set. You knew what was required of you. Freedom removes that clarity. Without external structure, every day demands self-definition. You decide what matters. You decide what success looks like. You decide when enough is enough. And that constant self-authorship is exhausting if you're not anchored. This is why some people unconsciously recreate constraints. They overload their schedules. They create unnecessary urgency. They cling to busyness. Not because they need it, but because constraint feels familiar. Constraint reduces responsibility. Freedom amplifies it. Under freedom, there's no external benchmark to measure against. Progress becomes subjective. And when progress is subjective, self-doubt creeps in. You wonder if you're doing enough, if you're moving fast enough, if you're wasting time. This internal pressure doesn't come from deadlines. It comes from identity. You are responsible for making your life meaningful, and that responsibility can feel overwhelming. Those who fail to adapt either drift or burn out. They oscillate between indulgence and intensity. They lack rhythm. They mistake freedom for absence of discipline and lose momentum. Those who adapt do something counterintuitive. They impose structure more rigorously than before. They create non-negotiables. They protect routines. They treat time with respect. They understand that freedom only works when paired with self-imposed constraint. This doesn't limit freedom, it stabilizes it. It creates a container for creativity and progress. It turns possibility into productivity. Freedom also tests self-honesty. Without oversight, excuses are harder to hide from yourself. You see clearly when you procrastinate, when you avoid discomfort, when you rationalize an action. There's no one to deceive but you. This confrontation is uncomfortable. It strips away illusion. But it also builds integrity. You learn to trust yourself because your actions align with your intentions. Over time, the weight of freedom changes. It stops feeling oppressive and starts feeling empowering. You no longer feel lost in possibility. You feel grounded in choice. But this transformation requires patience. It requires failure. It requires self-correction. You must earn the ability to handle freedom. Those who succeed don't seek to escape pressure. They learn to carry it. Accept that freedom is not light, it's demanding, but that demand is what gives it value. Freedom that costs nothing means nothing. Once you understand this, you stop longing for simpler constraints. You build a life that can hold freedom without collapsing under it. And that is one of the final tests of success. Success doesn't fail people. People fail success. This is the part no one wants to talk about. We frame success as a reward, but it behaves more like a stress test. It amplifies everything: discipline, insecurity, clarity, confusion. And most people aren't prepared for that amplification. The common assumption is that success solves problems. In reality, it replaces simple problems with complex ones. It removes excuses. It removes external pressure. It exposes your internal structure. And if that structure is weak, success accelerates collapse. Most people spend their lives preparing to get success. Very few prepare to sustain it. When success arrives, expectations shift instantly. From others, from yourself. The standard rises. The margin for error shrinks. And the identity you built during struggle may no longer serve you. Those who can't handle this often self-sabotage. They make impulsive decisions. They overindulge. They withdraw, not because they lost discipline, but because the psychological environment changed and they didn't adapt. Success also removes urgency. During struggle, urgency is external: bills, deadlines, survival. Success removes that pressure and replaces it with choice. And choice without internal direction leads to drift. This is why some people peak early. They reach a level of success, then stagnate. Not because they lack ability, but because they lose the tension that once drove them. Without pressure, effort dissolves. Handling success requires a new relationship with pressure. You must generate it internally. You must decide what matters without being forced, and that demands maturity. Another reason people struggle is identity confusion. They associate success with who they are rather than what they do. When identity fuses with outcome, fear increases. Any threat to success becomes a threat to self-worth. This leads to defensiveness and risk avoidance. Those who last separate identity from outcome. They see success as a role, not a definition. This allows them to adapt, evolve, and take calculated risks without emotional collapse. Success also magnifies loneliness. Fewer people relate to your reality. Feedback becomes distorted. Praise becomes less trustworthy. Criticism becomes rarer but more impactful. Without strong internal calibration, this isolation destabilizes decision-making. Most people never build that calibration. They relied on external structure for so long that they never learned to self-regulate at scale. This is why success breaks people who seemed strong during struggle. They were resilient under constraint, but fragile under autonomy. Success demands a different skill set: emotional regulation, self-direction, long-term thinking, the ability to operate without applause or urgency. Those who can't develop these skills often unconsciously sabotage what they've built. They long for the simplicity of struggle. They recreate chaos because chaos feels familiar. The brutal truth is this: success is not for everyone who wants it. It's for those who can adapt to what it requires. When people lose success, it's rarely because of a single mistake. It's because of patterns they never corrected. Success doesn't introduce these patterns, gives them room to operate. Self-sabotage is not conscious, it's protective. When your internal identity lags behind your external reality, tension builds. You're living a life your nervous system doesn't fully recognize as safe. Attention increases, expectations rise, visibility grows. Subconsciously, your mind looks for ways to restore familiarity. So familiarity feels safe even when it's destructive. This is why some people procrastinate after breakthroughs, why they miss obvious opportunities, why they create unnecessary conflict. These behaviors reduce pressure by shrinking the environment back to something recognizable. If you're used to struggle, stability feels suspicious. If you're used to chaos, calm feels empty. If you're used to scarcity, abundance feels temporary. So you test it, you push boundaries, you act recklessly. Not because you want to fail, but because failure feels predictable. Success also threatens identity. You may have built your self-image around being the underdog, the grinder, the survivor. When success arrives, that identity dissolves, okay? Without a replacement, confusion sets in. Who am I if I'm no longer chasing? Without a clear answer, people unconsciously create problems to solve. They recreate struggle to preserve identity. They turn progress into drama. They substitute growth with intensity. Another driver of self-sabotage is unresolved shame. Deep down, you don't believe you deserve success. You will find ways to undermine it. You'll discount wins. You'll minimize progress. You'll act in ways that confirm your negative self-concept. Success doesn't erase shame. It exposes it. Those who overcome self-sabotage develop internal permission. They allowed themselves to exist at a higher level without justification. They don't need to prove their worth through suffering. They also update their identity intentionally. They stop defining themselves by struggle and start defining themselves by stewardship, by responsibility, by consistency. This shift is critical. Without it, success feels like an accident waiting to be corrected. Self-sabotage fades when your internal narrative catches up to your external reality. When your nervous system learns that stability is not a threat. When growth no longer feels like betrayal of who you used to be. Most people never do this work. They assume success will rewire them automatically. It doesn't. It only reveals where rewiring is needed. Those who handle success well confront discomfort proactively. They notice patterns early. They correct behavior before it escalates. They treat internal instability as seriously as external risk. Because, at high levels, the greatest threat is not competition. It's unexamined psychology. Module 10, Segment 3. The few who make it to the end. By the time most people encounter the full weight of success, They've already decided, consciously or not, whether they can live with it. The difference between those who sustain success and those who collapse under it is not talent, intelligence, or luck. It's tolerance. The few who make it to the end develop tolerance for things most people avoid: uncertainty without panic, responsibility without resentment, pressure without collapse. They don't need constant reassurance that they're on the right path. They don't need the emotional highs that once fueled them. They've outgrown that dependency. They also accept that success is not a finish line. It's a condition, one that must be managed daily, maintained deliberately, protected from complacency and from ego. This acceptance changes how they move. They stop chasing validation. They stop comparing. They stop trying to prove themselves. The energy once spent on performance is redirected into precision. Those who last don't romanticize success, okay? They respect it. They understand its costs, the isolation, the pressure, the permanent responsibility. And they accept those costs without resentment. Not because they enjoy them, but because they see them as the price of alignment. They also develop internal governance, clear values, non-negotiables, personal standards that don't fluctuate with circumstance. This internal structure replaces external rules. It allows them to operate with consistency, even when no one is watching. Most importantly, they stop expecting success to feel good all the time. They understand that fulfillment is not constant pleasure. It's coherence. It's a life where actions, values, and direction align, where effort serves a purpose, where sacrifice feels chosen rather than imposed. This perspective immunizes them against collapse. They don't fall apart when things slow down. They don't overreact to wins. They don't identify with outcomes. Okay? They stay centered. From the outside, this can look unremarkable, calm, almost boring. But beneath that calm is resilience. The kind that only forms when someone has faced every stage of the journey without escaping into illusion. The few who make it to the end aren't obsessed with success anymore. They're committed to stewardship, some maintaining clarity, some living within the weight of their choices. They don't ask whether it was worth it. That question belongs to those who are still negotiating. They know the answer because they built a life that fits them. Success didn't complete them. It clarified them, okay? And that clarity is what allows them to endure long after the noise fades. End of script. Everything no one tells you about success. Brutal truths. Success isn't what people sell you. It's quiet, heavy, and unforgiving. This long-form narration explores the brutal truths about success, its psychological cost, isolation, and hidden pressure, designed for deep listening, calm focus, and nighttime reflection. #sleep. As Mr. #history.